Written by actually two people. It's in the counter papers. It's not in your bibliography. It's just come out from the University of Tel Aviv. But it's a very good friend of mine, a good man. Lars Dencik is one of the most senior social psychologists in Sweden. He's not a, this is not his regular job anymore. This is my regular job, anti-Semitism. We just, he's doing this because he's interested and did some work for the community. And especially a peculiar situation that has occurred quite recently in Sweden. And you'll see the situation in Sweden is unique. Now, you don't have to buy the whole thing. As you see, that what Dencik has a concept that there are three different types of anti-Semitism in contemporary Europe. And I'm going to show you that, and if you want to find out his definitions, which is crucial to this whole thing, then you go back to the paper. What I'm going to show you is how I think, the insights you can get by combining two data sets. It's a combination. So I'm just going to tell you quickly about two data sets. Right, and this is where we widen out the anti-Semitism problem and make it more practical, maybe outcome focused, and also policy focused. Right. So this is from his introduction. He's got two major surveys, differently focused, cross-national surveys. Right. The first one is done by the European Union, the Agency for Fundamental Rights. Okay. Which is out there trying to help the Jews against anti-Semitism. And he's drawn data from 8 EU countries, right? Belgium, France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, Sweden, and UK. A survey carried out in the second half of 2012. And it's supposed to be national samples, 750 people from the general population in each country, right? Doesn't matter if you're in Latvia or Germany, it's 750 people. Right? Now, the second survey, then it's Jews. Right? These are Jews' perceptions. It's Jews in these countries. Okay? In fact, I think I've got it around the wrong way. It's 750 in the ADL survey. There's slightly smaller samples in those 8 countries from the Agency for Fundamental Rights. It's 500 or so. With more where they could find Jews. Obviously, the smaller countries, they couldn't find so many. But they're not proportionate to the Jewish populations. The ADL survey was done in 102 countries around the world by some large fieldwork commercial agency, and carried out at the end of 2013. And what he's done is taken the results from the data set, the 8 countries that the FRA did. He's looked at the 8 countries and looked at the general population, right? So you've got the Jews' views of anti-Semitism and the general population's attitudes towards anti-Semitism. Understand the two? Jews' view of how bad anti-Semitism. It's again a victim's report or a climate. They're responding to their view of the national climate from their perspective as Jews, and the other people are saying what they think about the Jews. Okay? Okay. So we've got 2 data sets. What's the correlation? So, the ADL studied the proportion of the population harbouring anti-Semitic stereotypes of any kind. ADL gave them a thing: do the Jews control the world? Are they all bad people? Are they this, that, and the other? And they wanted to find out the general population's view of the Jews. And they wrote down the ones which were negative on the Jews. Right? And you can see there's a clear thing. 41% of the population of Hungary had anti-Semitic views, negatives. And 4% of Sweden. So it goes, and there's a kind of staggering here. Sweden, Hungary, then France, Latvia, Belgium, Germany, roughly the same, a little less in Italy. UK, slightly lower, only 8% seem to be. And Sweden, only 4%. of the general population holds anti-Semitic views, right? As they used to say, Mashiach side. But as far as the Jews are concerned, they don't see that at all. That's the general population's view of negative views of the Jews has very little relationship with Jews' view of the general population. Right? So you've got, all right, so it's high. You know, both the Hungarian Jews do think there's a lot of anti-Semitism, and you know, it's twice the rate, right? It's a problem. So there's a 2-to-1 ratio. France, yeah, it's logical, right? But then the next one, Latvia, seems to be peculiar, right? Paradoxical. Quite a lot of people who are anti-Semitic, and yet the Latvian Jews, majority of them say it's not a problem, right? We go to Belgium, well, you know, it's high, but they still got things. Belgians think it's more of a problem than Germans, with exactly the same proportion of people who are anti-Semitic, right? So the Jews think. Italy and Germany, again, the communities are very, very close in their perceptions, but it's slightly lower in Italy. Then you come to the UK, right? They're not as optimistic, the Jews, as the Jews of Latvia, but it's, you know, just under half think there's a problem with anti-Semitism. Many more than would suggest by 8% of the population having anti-Semitic ideas. Then we come to Sweden, the least anti-Semitic country, and it's in the 60%. It's in the same level as Germany and Italy, right? They're much higher than places. I mean, the Swedish people are much more worried about 4% of the population than the Latvians are about 28% of the population. Okay? So, that's what we're going to be looking at. Okay? These differences, and I'm trying to explain that. It's a long piece of paper, it's very well done, but I tried to take out the essence of this. So we're talking about perceptions of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism in the general population, and then we're going to look at can we explain it in any kind of way. All right, so you see the problem we're going to look at, okay, or the question. Okay, so what Denchik and Morosi have done is exactly what I just told you. They have they've created a metric, which is the population harboring anti-Semitic stereotypes divided by the proportion of Jews experiencing anti-Semitism as a problem in their country, right? So Latvia, obviously, you know, is 1.6% concerned for every anti-Semite, right? If you understand, every percentage. And then it goes up, and you see that Hungarians, Belgians, French, Germans, basically Italians, have the same ratio, right? The Jewish, if you want to call it overestimation, is between 2 and 3 times, right? The ratio is 2 to 3 times, right? Then you come to the UK, where apparently people are much more sensitive, and it's 6 times what it is in the general population. And then you come to Sweden, the least anti-Semitic population in Europe, apparently, it's 15 times. The Jews, 15 times as likely. And it's, you know, bizarre that Swedish Jews are 10 times worried, 10 times more aware or concerned than Latvians. Right? And these are reasonably, you know, good samples. Right? It's not an artifact of how you've done the questions or the rest of it. There seems to be something going on here which is peculiar. Okay? That's why he did the study, and you saw it's done from Sweden. Okay. Now we are going to deal with incidents. So roughly you've got 300 or 400 Jews in each country reporting on incidents where they have been attacked or threatened in a way that frightened you because you are Jewish. Right? So out of the, remember we had about 5, there were about, all right, 5 to 40, it's about 4,000 people, right? 4,000 Jews, and about 10% of them have received and had reported they've been frightened in this kind of way. Okay? Now, look at the results. First of all, I want you to do some arithmetic. Okay? If you look at it, Belgium has 58 cases, right? France, if you add them all up, has 78 cases. Germany has 54 cases. Hungary has 47 cases. Italy has 75 cases. Latvia has none. There's no Jews in Latvia being frightened, even though 28% of the population are anti-Semitic. Right? Sweden has 81 cases from the 4% of the anti-Semites. Right? And the UK has 63 cases from the 6% who are anti-Semitic. Right? So, again, you know, there's some metric here that we're looking at, which is something's going on in these countries, okay? And it looks as though different things are going on, right? Either the Jews are very different, the anti-Semites must be different, or something new is happening that people don't expect. So let's have a look. The first column, the blues. The blues are right-wing political views, right? The old nationalist right-wing people, right? So where are those people frightening the Jews? They're frightening the Jews basically in 3 countries: Hungary, Italy, and a little bit in Germany, right? But you see quite clearly here that Hungary, right, I'll point it out to you if you want to. Hungary is pretty unique, right? It's the only big blue, right? Hungary is the place where the Jews are frightened by the right wing. Nowhere else, okay, to any great extent. Because Hungary actually looks like, you know, it's a kind of throwback to the 1930s. If you look at it, it's nationalist right-wing people. Italy, surprisingly, is high, right? We saw the incidence are pretty high, but it's interesting. Look at the difference between Hungary and Italy. The Reds, left-wing political views are attacking Jews. They feel frightened by them. They're in 3 countries: Italy, Sweden, and France. Now look at the difference. In Hungary, nobody with a left-wing view is frightening the Jews, right? In France, more likely be the left wing than the right wing. Despite the rise of the Front National, the Jews are not frightened by them. It's interesting. Okay? Italy, Jews are in the middle of the road, people getting run down with the traffic going both ways. Right? There's right and left wing anti-Semitism. Sweden, few right wings, but mostly coming from left-wing political views. UK, exactly the same. Probably, you know, Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party issue. The Jews are more worried about the left wing than the right wing in the UK. Okay? It's a general Jewish population chosen on a random basis. Okay, so what we see here is different political forces frightening the Jews in different countries. So it's not one anti-Semitism. All right, now we come to the old Christian extremists. Right? Where are they? They're the yellows. Well, first of all, you can hardly find any yellows, right? Christians, extremism, traditional, what do you want to call it, Catholic. You know, Martin Luther and Torquemada have gone out of fashion, right? The only one where there's a little bit of it is, the highest is Hungary, right? 7 incidents. Okay? 7 people were frightened by the by Christians. Italy a little bit more. UK the same. Latvia doesn't have anybody frightening them at all. Belgium has got no left wing, no right wing, and hardly any Christians. Okay? So, again, a different pattern in terms of where the public thinks it's coming from. Right, the Greens, the Muslims. Okay? Now, look at the countries with the Muslims. The highest is Belgium. Well, you know, obviously they had a attack at a museum or something. But anyway, they feel, Belgian Jews feel the most vulnerable to Muslim extremists. Then France, right? So it looks like it's a terrorist kind of related opinion. Then you've got Germany and UK, exactly the same proportions of incidents that frightened, attacked or threatened the Jews. So the three countries with Muslim views are Sweden, Belgium and France, roughly the same numbers. But of course, the peculiarity, the peculiarity is, remember, it's not on the proportion of Jews in France and, 500,000 French Jews versus 20,000 Swedes. It's the same number of people, right? Roughly in each country. And then you've got Hungary's got hardly any Muslims. Latvia doesn't have any. Italy, it's not very, very high. The UK, as I say, is the same as Germany. But look, Sweden is high. Okay? You never hear it. Most of you, if you read the newspapers, would think Belgium and France, obviously, there have been incidents. Attacks on Jewish schools, Jewish museums, there's a lot of terrorism, people have been shot in the streets in both countries, right? And Sweden is at the same level, okay? But this data is quite interesting because for the first time we're talking about here about perpetrators, right? We're actually looking about who's doing the anti-Semitism. And of course, it might not be completely accurate, that's, but people have tried to think about it, and certainly there definitely seem to be different patterns in different societies. And, it's, to return to this, it's Belgium. Let's look at one at a time. Belgium, there's one source. France, as I say, it doesn't seem to be the Front National. Germany is interesting, slightly more right than left, which is surprising maybe, compared to what's happening in France, right? Germany and France have got a different pattern even in the political stuff. Hungary, as I say, is unique. It's looks like the 1930s. Italy, Italian Jewish community seems to be getting stuff from all corners, right? If you look at that, it's not a lot of incidents, but they're coming from every direction. And interestingly enough, they're reporting more anti-Semitism, if you add them up, than Hungary in Italy. Right? More incidents, more Jewish frightened Jews. Latvia seems to be like heaven. Sweden is bimodal, right? Left and Muslims. And I would suggest to you it's a new phenomenon, right? It's obviously happened quite recently, and it's surprising. Okay, but there's no Christian problem in Sweden at all. Yeah, sure. So ask questions.
A quickie, perhaps. But I was noticing that when you deal with from Sweden, UK, and France, that in those countries you also have the highest degree of Jews identifying with the country, in terms of identifying with being French or whatever. And in Latvia, you have the lowest.
What do you mean, from other surveys?
In terms of,
seeing themselves, well, because most of the Latvian Jewish population is Russian-speaking.
They don't identify with Latvia.
Well, but still, we're talking about if they've been frightened because you're Jewish.
Well, but I know.
It could be because they've been picked on because they're Russian. I don't know. It's difficult to we can throw out lots of theoretical answers to why this is the way it is. But the point we're trying to look at is in some ways what we can learn from surveys. You're going back to other data here. Let me just show you the last one.
I just had one question.
Yeah, sure.
Why is Sweden? Are you going to explain why Sweden is seen as something new, something peculiar?
Yeah. I think so. I tried to. Okay. Now, what he's done now, right, on the basis of 5,800, so this is the 750 in each country, right? Okay. He's looked at the proportion of people who are anti-Semitic in a country, right? Now, you know it's very different between the different countries, right? The 28%. But he's taken the people who are anti-Semitic and divided their attitudes on a questionnaire into 3 forms of anti-Semitism. Okay? So this is only the anti-Semites. What is the roots of their anti-Semitism? And he's divided into 3. You might agree or you might not agree with his definitions. But it's called one classic anti-Semitism, which is kind of Nazis and Martin Luther and all these kind of folks. He's got Israel-related accusations to the Jews in the country, that they're traitors or they support anti-colonialism or whatever it is. Sort of Israel stuff, anti-Zionism plus, but specific to the Jews of the country, right? The Jews are more interested in Israel than they are in France, or that they are aiding and abetting, whatever it is. And then you've got Enlightenment-based attacks on Jewish customs. And what Benchik calls that is really Voltaire, right? If you go back to Voltaire, it's Shechita Kashrut, it's Brit Milah, circumcision, and there's a couple of other things, that the Jews do that annoys secular-minded thing. In other words, it's a kind of anti-Judaism kind of stuff, but not from a Christian perspective, from an Enlightenment, secular perspective, right? You understand? It's not Muslim anti-Semitism, it's not Christian anti-Semitism, it's a secular, Enlightenment-based anti-Semitism, because the Jews are too traditional and they've got basically these weird tribal customs. Okay? So now let's have a look where the countries go there. Okay? Now, not surprisingly, we said Hungary seemed to get it from traditional quarters. Hungary is the place with the highest number of people have traditional anti-Semitic stereotypes in the population. Israel-orientated stuff, the Hungarian Jews, the Hungarian anti-Semites don't seem to be highly motivated by anything to do with Israel. Okay? You've got a little bit of Enlightenment-based attacks, but really it's classic, as you might say. France, interestingly enough, is much more, this is the percentage of, right, it's not 100% of the population, right? You understand, people can hold more than one type of prejudice, okay? So actually, of the anti-Semites in Hungary, 41% are using classic anti-Semitic arguments. They're also saying yes, 15% of them are also saying yes to Israel, and 21% we're all going to throw in the Enlightenment ideas as well. Right? So what this does is show you what I was talking about yesterday, the additive quality of this. Right? That they are drawing from a number of different sources. Okay? Rather than one source. Okay? France, you can see the classic anti-Semitism is lower than Hungary, but a majority of the anti-Semites go for Israel and the Enlightenment. Right? They say laicite and Zionism that's annoying them. Or, Latvia, interestingly enough, doesn't seem to, they don't seem to have one form of anti-Semitism there. And then it's less of an additive, but if it's like, interestingly enough, Jewish customs and classic, Israel is not a factor in Latvia. They don't seem to worry about it, even less than Hungary. And that I mentioned before when I did my survey of the Jewish leaders, that Israel is what worries the Jewish leaders, or being associated with Israel, as far as they're concerned, is a safety, security, whatever it is, issue in the West and not in the East. Right? So that's proven by the two former Warsaw Pact countries. Belgium, well, you can see Israel's right up. It's the highest. There's a few Enlightenment people, but it's like, looks a bit like France, maybe. Slightly less laicite kind of concern, slightly less secular there, but it looks like France. Germany, however, you can see the Enlightenment-based attacks are much higher. And that's why, okay, coming back to the previous ones, right, we'll just try to do some explanation over here. why Germany had, well, actually it doesn't show. Germany had less problems with than the French, however, with the left. So that's peculiar, right? Many more attacks on Jewish customs, which are usually associated with the left wing more than the right wing, right? Because the right wing are usually more Christian democratic or traditional and don't find weird tribal customs such a problem. Italy, you can see again, it's more Israel than anything else, but they throw in other things. Interestingly, Italy, UK, Israel, and secular kind of anti-Semitism, religious or classic anti-Semitism is pretty low in Britain, as you'd expect. And Sweden, right? Classic anti-Semitic arguments, you know, are not what's motivating the problems of Sweden, right? Traditional, it's not Nazis and all this and religion or anything else. It's the two things that are causing the problems in Sweden are Israel, but above all, Enlightenment attitudes. There's a kind of liberal society. They don't like the Jews because of Judaism as much as anything else.
Because about Belgium, you know, on the previous one, 90% were Muslims related, you know, prejudices.
Yes.
And then in this one, it's based on Enlightenment. How could you cope?
No, well, there's a difference. It's two different populations, I'm trying to tell you. These are the anti-Semites, and the other one is the Jews' perceptions, well, Jews' reporting of the incidents.
Okay.
Right? These people can hold these views but not carry out anything, right? The other one was factual. This is opinion, right? The opinions of the anti-Semites. This is, where do they draw their anti-Semitism from? It's a completely different issue to what the Jews are frightened by, okay? It's the Jews, then the anti-Semites. We're looking at two populations. What we're trying to do is find the interaction, right? Where it matters. We've got another one here. All right. Let me just end here. Maybe I'll go back to the last one because it's. Go back. So the point is, this is general population's opinion and the proportion of them holding these kind of anti-Semitic stereotypes. But you're correct. The point about Sweden is that I think that what's worrying the Swedes is a very, very peaceful society where there hasn't been much anti-Semitism before. And they're getting it from surprising quarter, not the Swedish nationalists, there aren't many, but they're getting it from left-wing, right, parties, the Social Democrats and others. And they're also, as Joel pointed out, it's incidence of the Muslim immigrants, right? So it's a new phenomenon in Sweden. And what you're seeing is a kind of panic. But we all know, I mean, I expect all of you read the newspapers and know the incidents in Malmo and places like that. The Swedish Muslims, right, are much more vigorous in their attacks on the Jewish community than the Muslims are in France or UK and all the rest of it. Because, I mean, one thing is that, I don't know if they're bringing in political people more than general population. It could be that Muslims in Sweden are different. They're much more politically motivated Muslims, mostly asylum seekers. And also that basically the government of Sweden isn't doing as much as other governments are to control what's happening on the streets. It's a lightly policed society. Yeah.
Is there a distinction from where they're coming? Specifically, like, are they Indian subcontinent?
No, a lot of them are coming from, my impression of Swedes is they're taking in a lot of Islamists who can't live in, you know, Algeria and Kurds, and, you know, they've got a lot more political people. That's what I'm told, okay? But they're not, there's fewer economic migrants, right? And real they're bringing refugees now, but I don't. But also I think the Swedish Jewish community, which has traditionally been very liberal, is very surprised at the new hostility from the left, right? That's frightening as well. If you live in Hungary, it's not a surprise that nationalist parties in Hungary don't like the Jews very much, right? Or the Gypsies, or the Serbs, or everybody else, But I think in Sweden it's the recency of the phenomenon, according to Denchik, and the fact that in a very peaceful society, they have a certain level of physical violence, right? Suddenly violence. It's not terrorism, but it's violence on the streets. Jews have been attacked. It's in Malmo, if you have any Jewish signs, people start with you. And the fact that the traditional liberal parties, or not liberal parties, the left-wing political parties in Sweden are not very supportive of the Jewish community. And that's the whole question. In you're going to go to CST. In France, you've got the government's willing to put people outside synagogues with machine guns. In the UK, you've got a good defence organisation. Swedish Jews never had this problem before, and now they've got a problem. So I think that frightens them, and it's out of all proportion, as you see. And the fact is, and that's what we know, why we know it's Muslims, is because the general population of Sweden, 96% of them don't seem to be anti-Semitic. It's a new group of people who've come in and are frightening the Jews. Okay? So I guess that falls to Charles's thesis much more. So we've had a disruption of European tranquility by new groups of people. And as we say, Sweden should be one of the good place for Jews, and always was, but now is suddenly problematic. But I want also for you to realise that his argument is there's three types of anti-Semitism, and in different countries you get different types of anti-Semitism. But my argument would be that in many cases you get this additive quality, right? It's not, left-wing people will draw right-wing ideas if it helps their case, right, their argument. And Enlightenment people will sometimes draw on classic anti-Semitic arguments just to make the case better, stronger. Okay, I hope that shows you the value of, first of all, of surveys. Whenever you do research, it always calls for more research. The questions always raise more questions, right? I mean, it's inevitable. But I think it gives you some idea of direction. And if you do these things regularly, you get some idea of trends. Are things getting worse or getting better? And what these things suggest, remember going back to the leaders perceptions were that anti-Semitism was increasing, right? And some of this suggests that the people in the West were more worried than the people in the East, and it's quite clear from this data that, situation is moving faster in the West than it is in the East. Okay, I'll leave it there. You can have your own interpretations of what this means. They know better than they ought to know stuff. Okay? So I'll break. Sure, questions.
I mean, it's the yellow, I don't do statistics, but the yellow lines correspond to Enlightenment-based attacks on Jewish customs.
Yeah.
And the blue is related to Israel.
Yes.
But the Enlightenment-based attacks on Jewish customs, like circumcision and slaughtering, whatever, those are also directed to Muslims.
Yeah.
Those are not necessarily going to be specifically anti-Jewish.
No, but they asked in an anti-Semitic survey about it says Jewish circumcision.
I understand.
Yeah.
But if,
all right, so it's an
okay. Right, but yeah. Coming back to what at least me, my main purpose is to think about ways in which I introduce a syllabus or a series of courses that relate to anti-Semitism that heighten the students taking the course awareness of trends in anti-Semitism and so forth. So for me, this image suggests if I use this, I can't say, well, this proves anti-Semitism, a heightened sense of anti-Semitism, unless literally I'm including a heightened sense of attacks on those who carry out certain rituals as part of a tradition of identity. My sons had circumcision. I expect that my grandchildren will as well. But the attack on circumcision is not against Jews, it's also against Muslims, and it's perceived that way. I see the blue line as something which is of concern, if in terms of a framework of heightened sensitivity or
it depends how you interpret question answers, right? Because you have to put yourself in there. The question talks about Jewish customs such as, right? It doesn't say Muslim customs such as. I agree that the people probably who, very worried about, animal, they're vegetarians or something, worried about animals, would say exactly the same thing to halal, right? As against kosher or whatever it is. So I agree. I mean, some people are equal opportunity haters or whatever you want to call it, prejudice. But we're just talking here about three sources where this is a survey about anti-Semitism, right? It's not a survey about Muslims or the general population. It specifically says this, and there's a whole lot of questions. I think the interesting thing is that the anti-Semites in every case draw from more than one, right? So even though they are saying, they may say, I don't like the way Muslims treat things, but then they don't have the Israel part, right? It's an additive. I mean, there's arguments both ways. Now, the nationalist part, but you could say exactly the same. The classic anti-Semitism would be against all outgroups, all others, right?
Well, because as far as I understand, Sweden, as one example, particularly Sweden and the Scandinavian countries, their attitude, their negative attitudes against foreigners, and in this context, really against the refugees who are coming in, has grown exponentially, justifiably or not.
Well, it's not,
So,
but it's not coming up against the Jews.
so this study doesn't really give us any context, in a way.
Well, no, look, you're looking specifically. I mean, you're talking about, I'm doing cross-national and you're doing in-depth in Sweden. You're trying to explain Sweden. The fact is that whatever they think about refugees and the rest of it, you'd think that would raise the amount of classic anti-Semitism, but it's not, right? In Sweden, it's the lowest part, we think. What I'm trying to do is do the opposite, right? You're focusing in on Sweden, and I'm suggesting that it has to be seen. The most interesting patterns are that different countries have got different patterns, and there's no relationship very little between incidence, Jews, and anti-Semitism, right? You've got a triangle here, and you're trying to see what's the interactions, right? And they're not as logical or consistent as you might expect, right? So and if you are going to go out there and do this thing, I guess they were going to be critiqued, right? So I think you have to be aware of these things beforehand, and what I'm trying to do. I have no problem with you interpreting it in any kind of way and saying, well, you have to put this, not compare Sweden with Hungary, but actually talk about Sweden today versus 10 years ago. I said comparisons are either across groups, right, or across time or space, right? Depends how you put it. And I began by saying it's the story that you get out of the data. And people are going to get different stories out of it. Yeah. So.
Yes, I want to make a comment for Katya also. The fact that the Muslims see the Judaism as we have a lot of common things with Muslims, more than Christians.
Yeah.
We both don't eat ham, we both circumcision, etc., etc. This doesn't help us, because they see they are the good religion. A Muslim say, my circumcision is the best. The Jewish is infidel. Also, although despite all this, a Muslim can convert. A Muslim can be Jew, but a Muslim cannot be Christian.
Why? It's prohibited and punished.
Because all this stuff, the ham, the conception of the Christianity, Jesus, Son of God, they don't accept this. a Muslim can be Jew, but he cannot be Christian. It's their concept, not
Many
mine.
cases of conversion. Afghanistan, for instance, Pakistani were killed after that.
Yes, but the real Islam cannot be a Christian. So we have, because that we have a lot of similarities.
Okay, guys, are there any questions about this? Because we're into theology now.
A mundane methodological question. You talked about the college students, the lists, but my question is, okay, you have the list. How many emails did you send out? How did you send them out? How did you get them to respond?
But the students, it was, I've forgotten, there's about, these days, I think about 12% of the students respond, right? To 2 or 3 emails. You do better with a list of Jewish leaders because, they want to wax miracle at any occasion.
12% responded?
Yeah, for the students, 10%, 12%, yeah. Because we did it from a university and, said, and, we got some expertise. But which is very good. The leaders, much higher percentage because they're leaders, right? And it was done from the JDC, the Herrscher, right? So obviously, I think it was like 60% or something. Some of them didn't want to reply. That's why they gave us, 20 names in France because they knew some of them wouldn't want to do it. But we ended up with 10, whatever it is, people. So this, of course, is both of these surveys, the European survey, monitoring centre stuff, is done with lots of money and, by a commercial firm, and the ADL, paid their kind of people. I don't know what the response rates were. I imagine they were pretty low, but if you spend enough money, you'll get them. I don't know, you could say, it's the usual thing, the silent majority remains silent, you don't know anything about them.
Is 12% a good rate of response?
It's very, very good for an online, without, what you might call, incentives or they don't have to reply. It's cold canvas, as you might call it, That's very good. That's what most surveys are today in the United States. The only one that's pretty good is the U.S. Census, where they do a great deal. But anything online is very, very low. And that's why people are using panels now. People who sign up to answer surveys. But then you have the problem of pre-selection, right? Now, we didn't ask any of the Jewish students if they'd suffered anti-Semitism and said this is an anti-Semitic study. We said it's about Jewish study, right? And interestingly enough, the Jewish students were a very mixed bag of people. About 25% said they were of no religion but Jewish culturally, 30%. If I remember rightly, something like 38% had a non-Jewish grandparent, right? So there were lots of intermarriages in their background. Most of them were fourth-generation Americans, which is interesting. That's what you're getting now. It's a very American population. They were, I forgot what the proportion was, it was kind of diverse. I think it was about 8% non-white, would be what we call it, about minorities, right? Or self-defined as minorities. So, I mean, those are the kind of things. But the point was that the anti-Semitism was not the focus. I think it's pretty good. As I say, these people I don't know so much about, but the strength of it is the patterning, right? That's the strength. Yeah.
Thank you for revealing presentations, especially this last one. And I would like to know your own expectations or like a future prediction based on these findings.
Well, I'm not I'm not as they say.
Are you pessimistic?
It's. I don't think anybody can predict what goes, the future, right? The rabbis say it's for fools and children. But there seems to be a trajectory. I can only go by that. It's not improving, right? It isn't, but it's changing. One of the points you have to realize is that it's metastasizing, but the virus, it changes, right? And I think that's the most important thing. And I think from my point would be that the arguments that, right, if you want to put in palliatives, prophylactics, right, stop this, you would have to use different arguments and focus on different populations in different countries, right? The problem in Hungary is not the problem in Sweden, right? For the Jews, right? And the propaganda, or whatever you want to call it, your arguments, your methodologies, your pamphlets would have to have a different language, right? In various different countries. That would be my opinion, if you want to try and stop the trends. But if we're dealing with macro levels, like Katja's just said about, rise of anti-minority feeling in Europe at the same time as terrorism and all the rest of it, it's not a hopeful sign, right? And this stuff is people are going to get more prejudice when they're frightened. We've seen coming back to it, the Swedish Jews are frightened, right? On the basis of much less problems than they've got in Budapest. Really, So there's no correlation between the two. Yeah.
Just a comment. I told you I'm dealing with hate crimes, and
yes.
we have similar statistical surveys about the reporting and monitoring to the police. And it's interesting, in Sweden, for example, yearly more than 200,000 cases are reported to the police. In the UK, more than 50,000, 55,000, and in Hungary, it's even 60. Just
Cases of what?
Cases of hate crimes.
Against who?
Again, hate crimes against
Anybody.
Roma, Jews, lesbian, gay, women.
How do you take into account, so if, let's say hypothetically 100,000 hate crimes are reported to the police in Hungary, how does the police deal with that? Because if 100,000 are reported,
100,000, no, in Hungary only 60.
okay, so let's say 60,000 are reported.
60, not 1,000, only 60.
60.
60. Yes.
So now 60, sorry.
No, in Sweden 200,000, and in UK 55,000. This is a very big difference.
Yes.
So my question is, if there's only 60?
Yes.
So what is the problem with why are crimes not being reported to the police in Hungary?
They are aware, and the NGOs help them, especially the Romas are reporting, and not the Romas, not the persons, I'm a Roma person or I'm a Jew, and I go to the police and report. The NGO or civil organizations, they go there and they tell my story. So that they are afraid from the police, and the police says, no, go home, you are just a gypsy, and we don't deal with your problem. And it was not a hate crime, and this is the point. It was just a physical assault, or somebody was stolen something from you. It is nothing.
So hold on. So in countries like Hungary and other countries, I know you're doing work with police. So there's a large discrepancy between how many hate crimes are reported to the police in many countries, some more than others. And I know the police work with community organizations and other non-governmental organizations. So how do the police and non-governmental organizations figure out the discrepancy between what is presented to the police, what is presented to the NGOs, to combine that figure? And then even if you combine that figure, there's an assumption that many issues are left out. How does the police and the NGOs grapple with the fact that
They work together, yes.
Do they grapple? Do they try to discover the missing information?
Yes, they do, but it just started. There's a special group, working group against hate crime, and they had a leaflet that's talking about 24 cases in a year, and the description of the case and everything in this booklet, this leaflet. But sometimes the police refuse to do that. Sometimes if somebody is very violent, I mean, in a good way, then the case goes to Strasbourg, even to Strasbourg. And
This is very.
I started with this problem, didn't I? About the problem of criminal justice system, the reporting system, and human and national crime surveys.
Barry, in your estimation, how, like, so I know that the Community Security Trust, who we're gonna visit on Monday,
Yeah.
they estimate, if my number is correct, if I remember, they believe they only get 25% of the
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
So what is being done, and they're one of the best in the world, what is being done to sort of close the gap between
Well,
what is reported and
yeah,
measured?
well, there's a
and
report that I
what
did.
is the reality?
I did a report with Polagansky, which was published by JPR and the Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard, in 2004, I think it is, in which we compared, it was, compared joint statistics of the CST and the Metropolitan Police, the police statistics in London, about London police. It's on the, you'll get it on the JPR website. And there was some overlap between that, because the CST, if it's serious enough, then it goes into the criminal justice system, right? The CST send it to the police. And then you've got, the whole issue then is, does the Crown Prosecution Service pursue it? Right? So you've got all these staggered cases there. So, and sometimes the Metropolitan Police had cases which the CST didn't, because Jews didn't go to the Jewish Communal Organization, they went straight to the police. So you've got, obviously, and then you've got the National Crime Survey, which is done, I don't remember, it's done at City University in London, it's done somewhere else now, which reports on, people's, we're back to crimes, and their thing, which, like we've just heard, that's where the hundreds of thousands come, 60,000 comes from. It's a completely different number to what, CST is 400 and something cases a year, and the Metropolitan Police is 380, and, you've got all these other things going on. Because it's all about definitions.
So my question to you
Yeah.
is, forget the criminal justice system, it's sort of the upper part of the government. So let's say, hypothetically, the CST has 400 cases, and hypothetically, the police have 300 cases. What is being done to go deeper into society and really get a sense of what is really taking place? Because I suspect that the 400 or the 300 is probably a small fraction of reality. What is being done to measure the real level of violence?
That's the National Crime Survey. That's what it's done. That is the one that is the unofficial side.
Is that broken down into, say, hate crimes against Jews or Muslims? Or
I don't know what it does these days. I'm not.
Was it ever broken down?
What?
Was it ever broken down by identity?
I don't think it was, actually. No, I don't think, because, I don't think in those times, in the early days, I think it was done by race, if you want to go. It was color-coded, right? I don't think it was done specifically on anti-Semitism. Yeah,
Two quick questions, and these are projections. If you looked at Poland,
yeah.
how much worse would the classic anti-Semitic stereotypes be today?
Well,
compared to Hungary, I mean, would it be, how much worse would it be? Or
Well,
would it not be?
On this one, you wouldn't get so much, but I think, let's go back to the other, because this is Denchik's, he took the ADL questions and he put them into 3 categories, okay?
Before you
I
move
want
the
to
screen,
show you.
Before you move the screen, I just want to say with the other question, it's maybe,
Yeah.
it's also related, whether, if you were to update Belgium and France, to what extent would Israel go much higher?
I don't know.
No, intuitively.
Well,
I mean, I know what I would say, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm somebody, unless I got the data, I don't speculate. I don't think it's useful to I think we have, I came back to the media, the value of having metrics, numbers and all the rest of it is to be evidence-based. If you just make wild accusations and things like that, you won't be taken seriously. But on the other hand, as you say, 2 or 3 really violent cases, an attack on a school or people being shot at a museum, is seen as, unique. Look, here we are. One thing I want to show you here, right? I would think that if you did Poland, the yellow here would be pretty high, right?
Right.
Okay? That if anywhere in Europe you wanted to predict where this Christian views would be high. That's the classic Polish anti-Semitism, right? That's what the evidence says. But we still have to go out and say, has Poland changed in the last few years? You've got a right-wing government in Poland, but the number of people who demonstrating about the right of abortion is much higher. So maybe the Christians aren't doing as well as it appears.
Yeah. I think the reporting element is really fascinating, and it's really multi-layered, because it can begin to impact some of the things, even Charles, you were talking about, like what's happening in the actual community, what's happening, you know, how do we navigate this gap? Because one of the things that I haven't heard discussed yet, but I'd love to see someone investigate, is just the distortions which can exist in the reporting mechanism and interaction, such as, for instance, we just saw, 24 days, right? So you can imagine a family that has real pain, real experience of, say, anti-Semitism, goes into, the police officer, may not be murder, right? But it could be, or kidnapping, and the bureaucratic mechanism or the anti-Semitism or the marriage of that can offer a kind of, perhaps, I'm wondering, I would like to see something about a chilling effect. That might lead to a kind of fatalism. Like, why go to the cops? They're not going to do anything. I know that happens, in lots of other communities where folks will say, well, look, I'm not even going to go to them because I'm going to get pushback. All they're going to do is make me feel stupid about having come. And they're going to tell me, it's in your head. They're going to deny my reality.
Or to add what you're saying, Colin, so when Madame Halevi was pushing and telling the police this is anti-Semitism, and the police and the policy, the decision makers refused to acknowledge was anti-Semitism, we saw the horrific results. And she's been, fighting the Jewish community with some success, the police and the decision makers to have more acknowledgement and recognition of anti-Semitism. And tragically, in the last 10 years, we know that France is really heating up as a society. So the question is, go back to it, that if we look at the statistics, what are the implications, and I'm being very general, so forgive me, but what are the implications when the media of record, when intellectuals and scholars, and when leaders of powerful democratic countries refuse ideologically to look at this issue, when people's lives are being affected in North America, in Europe, and most certainly where the rise of this reactionary, I call it a social movement, is very excited and gaining power in many parts of the world, and we've been silent.
Yeah, so. You're being a little naive about about the way the world works. Belgium, right? One of the worst cases of Catholic priests, pedophiles, right? It's linked to the government, right? It's not just in the anti-Semitism case. Whenever there's something which is political, the important is that a robbery, a rape, a murder, and all that will be dealt with in a normal way. But once you claim anti-Semitism, Charles, right? You cannot not allow for the fact that anti-Semitism is a political issue, right? As far as the government are concerned. It's about the government, right? It's about politics, it has much more resonance in society and the rest of it. And in every society, the police force are told to look for certain crimes and not for other crimes, right? They'll frisk some people and not other people, or their frisking is more important than count, people exceeding the speed limit. They'll put their resources where they want, right? Or they will go for crimes which are revenue generating, right? As we know, okay? Now, anti-Semitism doesn't fit this classic kind of policing model. It always it's a definition, or they admit, this is a murder, right? Irrespective of who did it, right? There's a murder in the two Boston Marathon bombers, right? The oldest brother was involved in a murder, right?
A
mass murder, where few of them were Jews, if I remember, in the majority, 3 out of 5 of them. Anyway, he was involved, they think. Okay? Now that was not, that was not pursued.
Beheadings.
Yeah, it wasn't pursued by whatever local police force in Massachusetts was looking at it. They saw it. Because drugs were involved, and they were involved, it was to do with drug gangs, right? Now you come along and say, well, 3 of the people were Jewish and therefore it was a, you know, and this guy eventually got involved with an Islamist attack. And therefore that was it. But you're also reading...
3 Jews that were beheaded.
Yeah.
They were beheaded.
Yeah.
In this attack.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's, you know, as far as the thing, but they, you know, I hate to say this, defense of the police, but that's what the Mexican drug cartels do as well, right? So you can't automatically assume that it's Islamist. You have to, if you're sitting there in there, you don't have all your assumptions, right? And these people, you know, they're risk avoidance. I mean, I've done a lot with
Barry,
cops.
if I could just respond, it was funny, I was thinking of the same instant.
Yeah.
I met Ayaan Hirsi Ali 6 months before the Boston bombing.
Yeah.
And she was saying, she was saying, Carlton, she was saying, Ayaan Hirsi Ali was a very important scholar and intellectual. She was saying 6 months before the Boston bombing that she knew that FBI agents that were making inroads into issues of radical political Islam in the Boston area were being removed from cases for years. As soon as they would get close to the issue, they would be taken off the case. So that's number one. Number two, so there was clearly, the police wanted to engage this, but there was political decisions within the FBI and within the government to do this, to stop this. This is documented.
Charles, there was a Bulger film, right? The Bulgers showed that the Bulger, who was a murderer, you know that movie that came out recently? It's all about the FBI was penetrated by the Irish gangs in there, and they were in the off. I mean, come on, this is Boston, this is police corruption.
So,
I mean, you know.
And the other point, well, yeah, it was from the mayor to the governor. Anyways, but this is happening in the United States today.
No.
The Irish mafia and stuff that happened.
Spotlight was another issue. That's the Catholic priest in it. Come on, the Irish Catholics are immune because the police are all Irish Catholics. And that's the reality. They go after certain people in Boston than others, right?
Look at the racism.
Okay, if I could just finish my point.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think that's today in the United States is a classic example of what you're speaking about historically. But I would submit to you that in Europe there is a change. And I think the fact is in some European countries there is a willingness for the first time to get a hand on what's happening on the ground in terms of anti-Semitism, other forms of violence that is happening in Europe. So I think there is, maybe I'm being naive, but I think that there's a real shift taking place and there is a willingness for policymakers and security forces to begin to understand what is taking place on the ground in Europe.
Having dealt with things, let me just say one thing. When anti-Semitism, which is seen as a political crime in many cases, becomes, Charles, an issue of public order, then the governments will react. And that's why the Jewish leadership said they had much more confidence in their governments than in the political parties that compose those governments. Because the governments of Europe have an obligation to maintain public order. Otherwise, their society and economy will collapse.
On that note, on behalf of everybody, Barry, thank you for your brilliant So thank you. So lunch is served, and we'll be back here at 2:30 for Joel's talk.
I don't know how I missed that. I did not know that. Wow.
Serving materials are on the FRA website.
Yes, what's up? But
I believe you.
Everything is, I said, everything is available.
I mean, it took me 2 seconds to track it down, and some of the other features that I think. I so much.